Why do your parents expect you to sacrifice everything? I was holding the rejection letter I'd just printed when my mother walked into my room without knocking, saw the paper in my hands, and smiled like I'd done something that made her proud. Good, she said, not even asking what it was. I knew you'd make the right choice. The letterhead read, Stanford Graduate Research Fellowship, and I'd spent 3 hours writing the email declining $25,000 in funding, full tuition coverage, and the chance to work with the leading immunology researcher in the country. My hands were still shaking from hitting send. I stared at my mother's satisfied expression and felt something inside me crack, not like breaking, but like waking up. She thought this was right. She genuinely believed I should throw away the opportunity of a lifetime, and she was happy about it. That's when I realized I'd been drowning for so long, I'd forgotten what breathing felt like. The acceptance had come 6 weeks ago, and I'd been celebrating for approximately 4 hours before my parents sat me down for a family discussion about priorities and responsibility. Now the opportunity was gone, and my mother was smiling. I looked down at the rejection letter again, at my own signature at the bottom, and thought, what have I done? I should explain how I got here, because it wasn't one moment or one decision. It was 21 years of training, of careful conditioning, of learning that my worth was measured by my willingness to sacrifice. My name is Dominic Whitmore, and I'm the oldest of 3 kids. My younger sister Isabel is 19 and in community college studying nursing. My youngest brother Caleb is 16 and still in high school. We grew up in a middle-class suburb of Denver where my dad Richard ran a moderately successful insurance agency, and my mom Laura worked part-time as a medical billing specialist. On paper, we were fine, comfortable, normal. What people didn't see was the invisible contract I'd been bound to since childhood, the unspoken agreement that my life existed in service to my family's needs and my parents' vision of what I should be. I was the smart kid, the responsible one, the golden child who would make everyone proud and also prop everyone up. The expectations were clear even if they were never explicitly stated. I would succeed, but not so much that I'd leave. I would achieve, but only in ways that benefited the family. I would dream, but small. I'd always been good at science, specifically biology. While other kids were playing video games, I was reading about cellular biology and genetics. I got a full scholarship to University of Colorado Boulder and majored in molecular biology with a minor in chemistry. I graduated summa cum laude last spring, published 2 papers as an undergraduate researcher, and got accepted to Stanford's graduate program in immunology with the fellowship that would have covered everything and paid me a stipend. It was the dream outcome, the culmination of years of work. Stanford, full funding, working with Dr. Gregory Foster, whose research on autoimmune diseases had won him nearly every major award in the field. I'd celebrated when the acceptance came, called my parents immediately, expecting them to be thrilled. There was a pause on the phone. Then my dad said, "That's in California, right?" Like the location was the first problem. "We need to talk about this in person," my mother added. "Don't make any commitments yet." The family meeting happened that weekend. I drove home from Boulder expecting to discuss logistics, maybe talk about how often I'd visit. Instead, I walked into an intervention. My parents were seated at the dining room table with serious expressions. Isabel was there looking uncomfortable. Caleb was in his room, probably smart enough to avoid whatever this was. My dad gestured for me to sit. "We've been talking," he started, "and we have some concerns about this Stanford thing." I felt my stomach tighten but tried to stay optimistic. Concerns were normal, right? Parents worry. "It's very far away," my mother added, "and we need to think about what's best for the whole family, not just you." That phrase, "not just you," would become a weapon they'd use over and over in the coming weeks. I tried to explain that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that Dr. Foster specifically wanted me in his lab, that the fellowship was incredibly competitive. My dad cut me off. "We're proud of you, son. We really are. But you need to think practically. You've got your degree. You could get a good job here in Denver, work in a lab or hospital, maybe teach. You don't need to go to California for 5 years." I pointed out that a PhD would open doors that a bachelor's degree wouldn't, that this research was at the cutting edge of the field, that this was what I'd been working toward. My mother's expression shifted to something sad and disappointed. "Dominic, I thought we raised you to value family. Your sister is going to need help with tuition. Caleb will be applying to colleges in 2 years. Your father and I aren't getting any younger." The implication was clear. My success was selfish. My dreams were an abandonment. Choosing Stanford meant choosing myself over them, and that was unacceptable. I left that meeting frustrated, but convinced I could make them understand. I spent the next week putting together a presentation, literally a PowerPoint, showing them the financial breakdown of the fellowship, the career trajectory, the research opportunities. I explained that I'd still visit during breaks, that we could video call regularly. I thought facts and logic would work. I was wrong. They didn't want information. They wanted compliance. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. The guilt campaign started small. Comments about how they'd sacrificed so much for my education, how they'd always put us kids first, how now that I was finally in a position to give back, I was abandoning them. My mom started having health concerns that required doctor visits, which she'd mention casually. I have another appointment next week, but don't worry. I'll figure out the ride. I know you're busy. When I'd offer to drive her, she'd sigh and say, it would be easier if you lived closer, but I understand. My dad started talking about the insurance agency struggling, about how he'd hoped I might take an interest in the business, keep it in the family. I'd never once expressed interest in insurance, but suddenly it was assumed I'd take over someday. Isabel pulled me aside one day and told me Mom had been crying about me leaving. She's really upset, Dom. She thinks you don't care about us anymore. I tried to explain to Isabel that going to graduate school didn't mean I didn't care, but she just shrugged. I don't know. It seems like you're choosing a fancy school over your own family. The pressure intensified over the following weeks. Every phone call became a minefield. My dad would talk about family loyalty and responsibility. My mother would mention how hard it was to manage everything, how she wished she had help, how nice it would be if I were around. They started involving extended family. My grandmother called to tell me she was disappointed that I was abandoning my parents. My uncle, who I barely spoke to, sent me a long email about the importance of family and duty. It was coordinated, deliberate, a full-court press designed to make me feel like the worst person in the world for wanting to pursue my education. I started sleeping badly, having stress dreams about letting everyone down. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, feeling guilty about a decision I hadn't even finalized yet. That's when I should have recognized what was happening. That's when I should have called it what it was. Manipulation, emotional abuse, parentification. But I was too close to it, too conditioned to see clearly. The breaking point came about a month after the acceptance. I was still in Boulder, finishing up some post-graduation research work, when my mom called. Her voice was strained, shaky. Dominic, I need you to come home this weekend. It's important. I asked what was wrong. She said she'd rather discuss it in person. The drive to Denver felt endless, my mind spinning with possibilities. When I got home, both parents were waiting. They sat me down and delivered the news. My dad's business was in trouble. He'd made some bad investments, taken on debt, and now they were facing potential bankruptcy. We might lose the house, my mother said, tears in her eyes. We were hoping to keep this from you kids, but we're out of options. My dad looked defeated in a way I'd never seen. I'm sorry, son. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but we need help. We need family to pull together. The implication was obvious. If I took a job in Denver instead of going to Stanford, my income could help stabilize their finances. I could live at home, save on rent, contribute. I could save the family. I felt the walls closing in. These were my parents, asking for help in a crisis. What kind of person would choose graduate school over keeping his family from losing their home? I spent that whole weekend running numbers, looking at job postings, trying to figure out if there was a way to do both. There wasn't. If I went to Stanford, I'd be living on a graduate student stipend in one of the most expensive cities in the country. I wouldn't have money to send home. If I stayed in Denver and got a lab tech job, I could make $40,000 to $50,000 a year, live at home, and contribute to household expenses. The math was simple, and it was a trap. On Sunday evening, I told them I needed time to think. My mother hugged me and whispered, I know you'll do the right thing. You always have. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about everything I'd worked for, the research I wanted to do, the future I'd imagined. Then I'd think about my parents losing their house, about Isabel and Caleb having to move, about being the person who could have helped but chose not to. The guilt was suffocating. I called Dr. Foster the next day, my hands shaking as I dialed. He was confused when I said I might need to defer the fellowship. Dominic, this opportunity won't be here next year. The fellowship is for this incoming class. If you defer, you'd have to reapply, and there's no guarantee. I explained vaguely about family financial issues. There was a long pause. I understand family obligations, he said carefully. But I've seen brilliant students derail their careers for temporary crises. Whatever's happening, make sure you're not sacrificing your future for someone else's present. I thanked him and hung up, his words echoing in my head. But what was I supposed to do? Let my family go bankrupt? I started looking at jobs in Denver, sending out applications, trying to figure out the logistics of staying. Every application felt like closing a door. Every interview felt like choosing the cage. I got an offer from a hospital lab, decent pay, boring work. It would be enough to help my parents and pay off my own student loans eventually. It would also be the end of my research dreams, at least for the foreseeable future. My parents were thrilled when I told them about the job offer. That's wonderful, my mother gushed. See? Everything works out. You can work here, help us get back on our feet, and maybe go back to school later. Later. The word hung in the air like a lie we all pretended to believe. I hadn't formally declined Stanford yet, but the deadline was approaching. I kept putting it off, hoping for a miracle or a revelation or something. Instead, I got more pressure. My dad sat me down and showed me spreadsheets of their debt. Medical bills my mom apparently had from various tests and treatments I'd never heard about before. The numbers were staggering. I'm not asking you to fix all this, he said. But if you're here, if you're contributing, we can manage. If you leave, I don't know what we'll do. The weight of it was crushing. I felt responsible for their situation, even though logically I knew I wasn't. I'd been conditioned my entire life to believe that my role was to support the family. That personal ambition was selfishness, that love meant sacrifice. I was in this fog of guilt and obligation when something happened that should have been a red flag the size of a billboard. I went home for dinner one evening and found my dad in his home office, door open, laughing on the phone. I heard him say, "Yeah, we closed the deal. Commission should be substantial." He sounded happy, relaxed. I stood in the hallway, confused. Wasn't the business failing? Weren't we on the verge of bankruptcy? When he got off the phone, I asked him about it. He waved it off. "Oh, that was just one client. One good commission doesn't fix months of problems." But something in his tone felt off. I started paying closer attention after that, noticing small things. My parents went out to dinner twice in 1 week. My mom bought a new outfit. These weren't the behaviors of people in financial crisis. I started wondering if they'd exaggerated the situation, but I felt guilty for even questioning them. They were my parents. They wouldn't lie to me about something this serious. Would they? The Stanford deadline was 3 days away when I met with a career counselor at UC Boulder, just to talk through my options. Her name was Dr. Rachel Brennan, and she'd been my advisor for undergraduate research. I explained the situation, expecting her to sympathize with the family obligation angle. Instead, she got very quiet. "Dominic, can I ask you something? Has anyone actually verified this financial crisis your parents are describing?" I was taken aback. Why would they lie about that? She chose her words carefully. "I'm not saying they're lying. I'm saying that sometimes families manipulate adult children into staying close under the guise of crisis. It's a control tactic. Have you seen actual documentation? Bank statements? Foreclosure notices?" I admitted I hadn't. My dad had shown me spreadsheets, but I'd taken his word for their accuracy. Dr. Brennan suggested something that felt radical. Before I made any final decisions, I should verify the facts independently. She gave me the name of a financial counselor who worked with families in crisis. "If your parents are really facing bankruptcy, this person can help them navigate it, and you'll know the truth." That conversation planted a seed of doubt that grew rapidly. I started thinking about all the ways the story didn't quite add up. The timing was too perfect, right after I got the Stanford acceptance. The vague medical issues my mom mentioned but never fully explained. The fact that they'd never asked me to help financially before, but suddenly I was crucial to their survival. I felt sick thinking this way about my own parents, but I couldn't ignore the inconsistencies anymore. I told my parents I'd made an appointment with a financial counselor to help create a plan for supporting them while managing my own finances. I expected them to be grateful for the help. Instead, my dad got defensive. "We don't need some stranger looking at our private business. This is a family matter," my mom agreed. "We just need your help, not a financial audit." The resistance was telling. If they genuinely needed help, why refuse professional guidance? I pushed back, gently at first. "If I'm going to be contributing significant money, I need to understand the full picture. That's not unreasonable." The temperature in the room dropped. My dad's face hardened. "Are you calling us liars, Dominic?" The argument that followed was brutal. They accused me of being suspicious and ungrateful, of prioritizing some fancy degree over my own family, of becoming arrogant and selfish. My mother cried, saying she couldn't believe I'd doubt them when they'd only ever sacrificed for me. I stood my ground, which shocked all of us. "I'm not doubting you. I'm asking for verification. If the situation is as serious as you say, documentation exists. Show it to me." My dad stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "Get out of my house." I stared at him. "What?" He repeated it, louder. "If you don't trust us, if you think we're lying to manipulate you, then get out. Come back when you remember what family means." I left, my heart pounding, feeling like I was in a nightmare. I drove back to Boulder in a daze, my phone buzzing constantly with texts from my mom. "Your father is very hurt. You've changed. I don't know who you are anymore." The manipulation was transparent now that I was seeing it clearly, but it still hurt. These were my parents. Even if they were wrong, even if they were lying, they were still the people who raised me. I met with the financial counselor Dr. Brennan had recommended. His name was Thomas Greer, and he'd worked in family financial mediation for 15 years. I explained the situation as objectively as I could. He asked if I had access to any documentation. I didn't, but I gave him my parents' names and my dad's business information. "I can't access their private financial records without permission," he explained, "but I can check public records for things like liens, foreclosures, bankruptcy filings. Those are public information. Give me a couple of days." 3 days later, he called me back. "Dominic, I've checked everything I can access publicly. There are no bankruptcy filings, no foreclosure proceedings, no liens on the property. That doesn't mean they're not in financial trouble, but if they're facing imminent loss of the house, there would be a paper trail by now. Either the crisis isn't as immediate as they claimed, or..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. They'd lied. Or at minimum, they'd catastrophically exaggerated. My parents had manipulated me with a fake financial crisis to make me turn down Stanford. The realization was devastating, but it also clarified everything. This wasn't about needing my help. This was about control, about keeping me close, about making sure I didn't outgrow them or build a life they couldn't access. I'd almost destroyed my future based on a lie. The Stanford deadline had passed 2 days earlier. I'd sent the rejection email while still believing my family needed me. Now I knew the truth. but the opportunity was gone. I called Dr. Foster in a panic, explained what had happened, begged to know if there was any way to reverse my decision. He was sympathetic, but firm. The fellowship has been offered to someone else. I'm sorry, Dominic. This is a painful lesson about boundaries with family. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at nothing, when my phone rang. It was Isabel. Dom, what did you do? Mom and Dad are freaking out. They're saying you accused them of lying and now you're not speaking to them? I took a deep breath and told her everything. The financial counselor, the lack of public records, the timeline of their crisis aligning perfectly with my Stanford acceptance. There was a long silence. They wouldn't, she sounded uncertain. Then she said something that broke my heart. Mom did seem really happy when you said you were taking that Denver job. Like, relieved happy, not grateful happy. I asked if she'd ever seen evidence of the financial trouble. She admitted she hadn't, that she'd just taken their word for it. We talked for over an hour. She was starting to see what I was seeing, but she was also scared. If you're right, if they really did lie, what does that mean about everything else? About how they are? That question haunted me. I started reviewing my entire childhood through this new lens, and patterns emerged that I'd never recognized before. Every time I'd wanted to do something independent, there'd been a crisis that required me to stay close. When I'd wanted to do a summer research program in high school, my grandmother suddenly got sick and needed help. When I'd considered applying to out-of-state colleges, my dad's business had its first crisis, and they needed me around. When I'd thought about studying abroad junior year, my mom had health scares that mysteriously resolved once I decided to stay. The crises were always just serious enough to justify my sacrifice, but never serious enough to require professional intervention. It was a pattern of manufactured urgency designed to keep me tethered. I felt stupid for not seeing it sooner, but that's how manipulation works. It's gradual, consistent, and wrapped in love and obligation. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. I made an appointment with a therapist, Dr. Michael Reynolds, who specialized in family dynamics and adult children of controlling parents. In our first session, I laid out everything. He listened without judgment, taking occasional notes. When I finished, he said something that made me want to cry and scream simultaneously. Dominic, what you're describing is a well-documented pattern called enmeshment, combined with emotional blackmail and parentification. Your parents have systematically trained you to prioritize their needs and emotional states over your own well-being and development. The financial crisis story was likely a test to see how far they could push before you'd rebel. When you started asking questions, they punished you with rejection and guilt. This is abusive behavior, even if they don't see it that way. Hearing a professional call it abuse made it real in a way my own realizations hadn't. I wasn't being oversensitive or ungrateful. I was responding rationally to genuinely harmful treatment. Over the next few weeks, I worked with Dr. Reynolds to understand the dynamics and plan my next steps. He helped me see that even if I couldn't get Stanford back, I could still reclaim my life. I could still set boundaries, still pursue my goals, still refuse to sacrifice my future. The first step was confronting my parents with what I'd discovered. Dr. Reynolds helped me prepare for that conversation, warning me they'd likely deny, deflect, and attack. People who manipulate rarely acknowledge it. Even when confronted with evidence, they'll reframe themselves as victims. Be ready for that. I set up a meeting at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between Boulder and Denver. My parents arrived looking wary. I'd prepared notes, almost like a presentation, laying out the timeline of crises, the lack of documentation, the pattern of manipulation. I kept my voice calm and factual. I need to understand why you lied to me about the financial situation. I've verified through public records that there's no bankruptcy filing, no foreclosure. I turned down a life-changing opportunity based on information you gave me that appears to be false. My dad's face turned red. You had us investigated? You had some stranger dig into our private business? I stayed calm. I asked a financial counselor to check public records because I needed to verify information that was being used to make a major decision about my life. That's reasonable. My mother started crying. I can't believe you think we'd lie to you. We're your parents. We love you. I pushed back gently. Then show me the documentation. Bank statements showing the debt, letters from creditors, foreclosure notices. If I'm wrong, prove it, and I'll apologize. They couldn't or wouldn't. The conversation devolved into accusations and tears. They claimed I was being cruel and heartless, that I'd been poisoned by my therapist and counselor, that I cared more about strangers' opinions than my own family. When they realized I wasn't backing down, my dad delivered an ultimatum. If you walk away from this family, if you choose to believe we're these manipulative monsters, then you're choosing to be alone. We won't have a relationship with someone who doesn't trust or respect us. I felt the weight of that threat, the fear of losing my family, but I also felt something else. Clarity. I love you both, I said quietly, but I can't sacrifice my entire future to make you feel secure. I'm going to rebuild my life and my career. You're welcome to be part of that if you can respect my boundaries, but I'm done being controlled. I walked out of that coffee shop, shaking but free in a way I'd never felt before. My parents didn't contact me for 3 weeks. When they finally did, it was my mother, calling to say she and my dad had been discussing things and wanted to work on our relationship. She suggested family therapy. I agreed, cautiously hopeful. The therapist they chose was Dr. Jennifer Klein, who specialized in family systems. In our first session, my parents positioned themselves as the hurt parties. My mom talked about feeling betrayed and disrespected. My dad claimed I'd embarrassed them by involving outsiders in family business. Dr. Klein let them talk, then turned to me. Dominic, what's your perspective? I laid out the facts again. The pattern of manufactured crises, the false financial emergency, the systematic undermining of my independence. Dr. Klein's expression shifted as I talked. She started asking my parents direct questions about the bankruptcy claim, about documentation, about their response when I'd asked for verification. They stumbled through non-answers, eventually admitting they'd perhaps overstated the urgency, but insisting it was because they genuinely needed help. Dr. Klein called them on it. Exaggerating a crisis to prevent your adult son from pursuing educational opportunities isn't asking for help. It's manipulation. Whether you intended it that way or not, the impact on Dominic has been significant. My parents looked shocked that the therapist wasn't siding with them. Over the next few sessions, the truth slowly emerged. They admitted they'd been scared of me leaving, worried I'd become too successful and lose touch with my roots. My mother confessed she'd always imagined I'd stay in Denver, close to home, available to them. My dad acknowledged the financial issues were real, but nowhere near bankruptcy level. They'd simply wanted me to feel needed enough to stay. The lack of self-awareness was staggering. Even as they admitted to manipulation, they couldn't seem to grasp why it was wrong. In their minds, parents were entitled to shape their children's futures, and children who resisted were ungrateful. During one session, Dr. Klein asked them directly, "What did you think would happen when Dominic eventually discovered the truth?" My mother looked genuinely confused by the question. "We thought by then he'd be settled here, maybe meet someone, build a life in Denver. He wouldn't want to leave anymore. They'd planned for me to be trapped by inertia and circumstance." Dr. Klein turned to me. "How does hearing this make you feel?" I felt gutted, like my whole life has been a cage that looked like a home. She nodded. "That's an accurate assessment. Dominic, you're not obligated to maintain a relationship with people who see you as an extension of themselves rather than a separate person, even if they're your parents." That statement gave me permission I didn't know I needed. I started rebuilding my life with intention. I kept the lab job in Denver, but started applying to graduate programs for the following year. I knew Stanford was gone, but there were other schools, other opportunities. I moved out of my apartment and into a house with some other researchers, creating distance from my parents both physically and emotionally. I set firm boundaries about contact. No surprise visits, no guilt trips about not coming home enough, no discussions about my career decisions. When they violated these boundaries, which they did regularly, I enforced consequences. If my mother called crying about feeling abandoned, I'd end the call. If my dad sent long emails about family obligations, I wouldn't respond. It was exhausting, but Dr. Reynolds assured me that boundary enforcement got easier with practice. I also started talking to Isabel and Caleb more directly about what had happened. I wanted them to understand my perspective, but I also didn't want to poison their relationship with our parents. That was their journey to navigate. Isabel surprised me. After a few months of watching how our parents responded to my boundaries, she started setting her own. She announced she was transferring to a 4-year university out of state, something our parents had convinced her was financially impossible. When they pushed back, she held firm, citing my example. "Dom was right," she told them. "You use money and guilt to control us. I'm not doing this anymore." My parents were furious, but they couldn't stop her. She was 19, legally an adult, and she'd applied for financial aid without their help. Caleb was younger and still fully under their influence, but he started asking me questions about why I'd left, what had really happened. I answered honestly but carefully, trying to give him information without forcing him to choose sides. I told him that everyone had to decide for themselves what kind of relationship they could have with our parents, and that I'd support whatever he decided. In November, almost 6 months after the Stanford rejection, I got an email that changed everything. It was from Dr. Foster. He explained that the student who'd received the fellowship after me had to withdraw due to a family emergency. The position was available again if I was still interested. I read that email 5 times, my heart pounding. This was my second chance, my do-over. But accepting meant fully committing to the choice I'd started making months earlier, choosing myself over my parents' expectations. I called Dr. Reynolds. "This is what you've been working toward," he reminded me. "This is your life. Do you want it?" I did. I called Dr. Foster that same day and accepted the fellowship. Then I called my parents to tell them. I expected anger or guilt trips. Instead, my mother just sighed. "I suppose this was always going to happen. You were never really ours, were you?" The statement was so revealing, so honest about how she saw me, not as a separate person, but as a possession, something that belonged to them. "I was never yours to keep," I said gently. "I'm your son, but I'm also my own person. I hope you can understand that someday." Moving to California in January felt like stepping into a life I was supposed to have lived all along. The research was everything I'd hoped for, challenging and exciting. Dr. Foster was an incredible mentor, pushing me to think bigger and work harder. I made friends with other graduate students who understood the all-consuming nature of research. I started dating someone I met at a seminar, someone who thought my dedication was admirable rather than selfish. I built a life that was mine, not an extension of my parents' needs or fears. It wasn't perfect, and I still had moments of guilt, but they got less frequent and less intense. I talked to Dr. Reynolds weekly via video calls, processing the ongoing journey of separating from my family of origin and building my chosen life. I stayed in contact with Isabel and Caleb, though Caleb's communication became strained as our parents clearly influenced what he could or couldn't say to me. That hurt, but I understood. He was still young, still dependent on them. I had to trust that someday he'd have the same awakening I did. My parents and I maintained a distant, cordial relationship. We exchanged emails on holidays. They didn't visit California, and I only went back to Denver once for Isabel's graduation. We were polite to each other at the ceremony, like distant relatives rather than parents and son. There was no dramatic reconciliation or tearful apologies. They never acknowledged the full extent of what they'd done, and I stopped expecting them to. Some people can't see their own manipulation because admitting it would destroy their self-concept as loving parents. I made peace with that. They gave me life and raised me, and for that, I was grateful. But they also damaged me in ways I was still unpacking in therapy, and I didn't owe them my future as repayment for my past. That was the hardest lesson. Love doesn't require martyrdom. Family doesn't mean sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.